G'day and welcome to the Psych Up. It's Ryle here. Today I wanted to spend some time going through schema therapy. This is going to be just a real brief sort of video around schema therapy, sort of talking a little bit about the kind of clients that I might be helpful with, and then kind of just identifying and exploring how you would start to unpack certain schemas, looking at how we can notice schemas affecting people and our clients in their day-to-day. So what is schema therapy? Well, schema is a form of therapy that really focuses on maladaptive core beliefs. So you might have clients who continue to present with certain pervasive views of themselves, of the world around them, certain fears and anxiety that might be ongoing and pervasive regardless of the sort of treatment you might have provided to date. Things that are kind of quite core to schema therapy, some of those core schemas are around like failure, often not feeling good enough, inadequacy, unmet needs, poor emotional care and neglect, mistrust, abuse, fears and anxieties, all of these different things. And look, there's a whole array of them, and I guess today's plan is not to necessarily identify them all, but to simply just talk through and introduce schema to you. You might be starting to do schema therapy, you might be on your journey of sort of understanding this, or you might be really interested in and looking at taking on and doing some schema training, which certainly can be effective as well. So who's this going to help? Look, schema therapy can be effective and workable for many client presentations. What I've found in private practice is that it certainly is beneficial when the clients are experiencing things like trauma, they have maybe abusive upbringings and history behind them. It also can be quite effective, or I've found transitioning to schema therapy when other modalities haven't quite worked. And the reason I find that works or creates a bit of a shift is that we start addressing the things that kind of sit there underneath. We're not just spending time or I feel like we're not spending time in that kind of presentation type stuff. We're sort of identifying what's actually driving these maladaptive behaviors and problematic behaviors. So it's certainly, if you're interested in looking at schema therapy and training, this is a great form of therapy to start adding into your practice. And I would certainly recommend schema training. So let's get this kind of working here. Schema therapy. All right, fantastic. So how are you going to identify this? Well, first is going to be through your history taking, conversations with the client. Your over time you may notice certain certain components, and the stuff I would encourage you to be on the lookout for then is, what are these pervasive core beliefs? What are the things that they continue to maybe say about themselves or the world around them? And then that really fits into the picture of a schema. So you need to, and I'd recommend, start getting familiar with the 16 or 18 core schemas or primary schemas that sit there, and then you can start hearing clients' language, and you'll notice it kind of fits or well fits within certain definitions. The other quick stuff that is going to help you is going to be doing the YSQ and the SMI, Schema Mode Index, and the Young Schema Questionnaire. So those are going to give you some of those labels that you need, some of those clear definitions as to what schemas sit there, and then that will be beneficial for your work with the client. You can actually start referring back to that. So you've done that, you've taken history, you've explored kind of history. What does it then start to look like in therapy? So what happens when we start to work with these schemas? Well, let's say, for example, your client kind of, everything comes back that they experience the unrelenting standards schema. So, unrelenting standards schema involves the underlying belief that you must strive to meet very high internalized standards of behavior and performance, usually to avoid criticism, typically results in feelings of pressure, difficulty slowing down, hypercriticalness towards oneself and others. It includes kind of impairments of pleasure, relaxation, your health, self-esteem, accomplishment, all of those different things. And it often kind of comes across in your clients where they might be experiencing things like perfectionism, inordinate attention to detail, underestimating their own performance, rigid rules, so many shoulds and musts in many areas of life, and unrealistically high moral, ethical, cultural, precepts. They might be really preoccupied with time and efficiency, so feeling that more must always kind of be accomplished. So often what I've found when working with this presentation is that identifying that to the client, in many cases, is kind of a little bit eye-opening. In some ways, they're sort of the opposite, where they feel like they're not doing enough, where they feel like they're not actually achieving as much as they'd want. And so you're sort of shattering the norm a bit for them by identifying, hey, look, you've got unrelenting standards here. This is your mind telling you that nothing is ever good enough. And no amount of pushing in that direction is actually going to make you sit back and suddenly go, yeah, I'm fine, right? And so it is the labeling and the correct identification of the schema is very important. Now you'll find, and in my experience, is when you mislabel it or you make a mistake or you get it wrong, the client pushes back. They're like, oh, no, not so much me, right? And even as you go through, these definitions are very long, often for all the schemas. And so you'll find, or maybe you might notice or be noticing that they go, oh yeah, some of that fits and some of that doesn't as well. Okay, and so your unrelenting standards schema here, for many, things like perfectionism, the inordinate attention to detail, underestimating your own performance compared to everyone, is going to be stuff that probably is quite relatable. But you might find some people are not as hypercritical to themselves, or you might find that they don't have many rigid rules. It's just this sense of pressure or perfectionism that they have to follow, which in many ways you can kind of circle back and find how that fits into the broader definition. So it's very handy having that. Now, often you're going to start and do a little bit of psychoeducation with the client, defining the schemas, noticing how this plays out in life, maybe relating this back to your history. Okay. Now, schema therapy leads to some rather intense end goal forms of intervention. Imagery rescripting, chair work, those two are quite effective when we look at shifting maladaptive schemas. Okay. In your early sessions, and particularly in your early days of working with schema therapy, there are a few different things, or there's some stuff that we can be working on and very quickly, be supporting the client in a way that is familiar with other forms of therapy like ACT or CBT. And what I mean by that is continuing this sort of work of knowledge-based building for the client. And so we want to start narrowing down for the client and building their awareness of the impact of these schemas. And we can use these three forms or these three labels of behavior to notice how the schema gets activated. So, surrender, avoid, overcompensate. So what you might have done is you've gone through, you've done the history, identified some unrelenting standards here, done the psychoeducation and referred back, and now you want to help the client identify what this looks like on a day-to-day basis. So what does that mean? Surrendering to, so you might sit down with a client using a whiteboard or whatnot and actually go through each of these labels and spend time working with them to unpack them and explore them. So surrendering is where you are essentially allowing this schema to become the driver. I use the analogy of like it's in the driver's seat here. Something has triggered or activated this schema and it is pushing and dictating the world around you. So for unrelenting standards, that might mean the perfectionism comes out. So maybe, excessive cleaning. could be OCD type behaviors. Maybe you want to start identifying the thoughts. What is it they think and feel? I'm not good enough. I'm doing a bad job. Need to do more. Maybe they start sort of feeling and thinking that they're failing. So you want to highlight what is the behavior, what do they do when they surrender to the schema, because that allows the increased awareness is increased management of the schema. That it's like, all right, well, no, you're going through this behavior. That's actually you surrendering to the schema, and all that's doing is actually creating this link even more. It's affirming, what your schema says. Your schema is saying, hey, you're doing a bad job. You're not as good as you think you are. So you're surrendering and letting that dictate your life, and that just sends the signal straight back that you need to do more in order to do better, right? So really important that the client starts to understand what their surrendering is. Next, we want to go through avoid. Avoidance is typical human behavior, right? Faced with a difficult thought or feeling or experience, and we want to avoid it. So here, this would be where we do anything that once the schema is activated, we're doing anything that we potentially can in order to avoid the schema, okay? Typical things is drink, drug. This is, effective, or not effective, but maladaptive avoidance behavior. And it serves the purpose of the client not having to experience that schema. So that might look in your presentations, that might be like, I just find drinking more, and more and more I get home and the kids are just running around and I can't cope, and I haven't been able to do any of the jobs around the house, and so I just sit down and I have a few drinks, and that helps me get through the night. And if you pull that back away from that kind of drinking behavior, if you change the focus off that just for a moment and kind of went back, well, what is prompting that? In an unrelenting standards kind of schema, it may be that the house was a mess and I just couldn't cope with how crap I'm doing, or I couldn't cope with the fact that I got home from work and I was exhausted. I just didn't want to spend time with anyone, and I'm not good at being a mom, a dad, a partner, XYZ. And so the trigger there is I'm failing, right? I'm not doing good enough. I'm not meeting this unrelenting standard of my life. And the symptom, or how that displays in the client's life then, is, well, I avoid it. I drink, I drug. I think doom scrolling sits well, under here. Right. Eating. Anything that affects or often changes or masks the emotional experience. Sleeping. Right, certain levels of avoidance, withdrawing, shutting off, all of that sort of stuff. So again, I think what I found with schema therapy is that it's a bit like I don't know if this analogy works, but it's a little bit like a light switch, right? Turn on the light from the wall, and what you see is this big bright light over here. You go, and as therapists, typically we jump in and go, oh, well, let's fix the big bright light. Let's go and have a look at that. That must be the thing that needs the attention, right? And I think, say for example, with clients with drinking behaviors, you can, and there's effective therapies in let's just focus and work on drinking. Right, and we can just prioritize and work exactly on that. Now, what schema therapy though is about, I think, is it's kind of like looking at the wiring and looking at the switch, coming back to the root and the cause of why something is sitting there. And so you can notice even here, whilst with this client, say you may spend that time and do work on the drinking behavior, you're really looking at, well, what is activating that? Why are these things happening? What's actually causing you? Because it can be so beneficial, the client starting to know and doing work, around that. So lastly, and one that I think is quite difficult, is our overcompensating behaviors. Now, this is what I call the kickback. Essentially, it's coming from the same schema, but it's this like kickback energy. So on an unrelenting standards space, the schema is everything matters, everything needs to be perfect, you need to do it all, you're the one responsible. So overcompensating might be nothing matters. And so this might be then of you're getting some helplessness kind of presentations. What's the point? Why bother? Okay. It's coming from the same place. So all or nothing kind of behaviors, I guess, are very, very familiar and consistent with the unrelenting standards schema. All right. And again, you want to look at the thinking. What does your mind do in this space and the behavior, and then check in with your emotions. Or how does that ultimately leave you feeling? Probably pretty helpless. Right. So unrelenting standards, people, perfectionism, it's no grey, it's black or white, it's 110% or nothing, because the overcompensating, is the kickback energy from, well, if everything matters, then, well, nothing matters, right? So this analysis with your clients is very important. For me, I spend maybe 1-2 sessions going through this, tying in things like imagery rescripting. But schema therapy is a very, there's a lot of analysis and there's a lot of tools that you can be using to help the client become more aware of what is driving their maladaptive behavior and their maladaptive schema. Okay, and this is a great place to start. So, the next stuff, I guess, that you might be learning or wanting to integrate into your, schema therapy then is things like the imagery rescript, where we go back and actually rescript these maladaptive core beliefs. And chair work is a very good modality and exercise within schema therapy that's quite effective. The unrelenting standards stuff, in terms of, this is where your SMI from schema comes in with the modes. You're often going to get the demanding parent kind of modes in unrelenting standards, the hypercriticalness, that's those commentaries of you're not doing good enough, you're failing, you need to do better, right? And so chair work as an exercise is very effective in kind of calling out that stuff. So, again, as a therapy, it's so interesting to see how this plays out on the ground with our clients. But I'd encourage you to start here. If you're working with clients and starting to integrate schema therapy into your work, do this stuff around, working on and identifying those core beliefs. Do the questionnaires that are helpful to bring out some labels. Take and be working with that client to build that good history. And the psychoeducation in surrender, avoid, and overcompensate behaviors is, allows the client, while they're going about their day-to-day, to start recognizing pervasiveness of the schema. You could set this up as a journal task. You could have the client kind of do this for homework and just record, what did you do, where, and when, and how. So hope this has been helpful. Leave a comment down below if you found this interesting. Let me know what you do with your clients in terms of how you're integrating schema therapy into your practice. Again, this is the Psych Up. I'm Ryle, and I would love for you to be able to subscribe and follow along for more. So thanks. See you.